Good day. Today we are going to do AC5 In Class Project. So please download, make sure that your database from AC5, the assignment is downloaded from SAM, and that you have your instructions available. And let's get started. So AC5, we're really going into a lot more detailed and more specific queries. We're not doing any forms or reports or things like that. We're showing the different options that you have and the ability to really customize your queries and your database to your audience and to your user. So let's get started. Step 1, create a query to find all records in the patient table in which the phone field values starts with the area code 234 with the following options. So we're going to do a query, and we're going to do a create query, and we're going to go straight into query design. We don't want the wizard, we want to do the design. So query design, and you want your patient table, and let's make this big enough that you can see everything. Okay, we're going to add the patient ID, patient first, patient last, address, city, state, zip, phone, birth date, and gender. Basically all the fields, but they want them in that specific order. Before we do the condition, we're going to go ahead and do step B, which is sort the query in ascending order by city. So down here, we're going to say ascending. And then we're going to put in our condition. And our condition is that the phone number starts with the number 254, or starts with the area code, 234. So basically what they're saying is that they really don't care what any of the numbers are after that 234. They just want to make sure that your phone number starts with 234 because that's where the area code is located. So we're going to use what's called a wildcard. We use wildcards for purposes just like this, that we really don't care what comes after or maybe what comes before, things like that. It could be anything, but there's only a certain setup that we care about, and then after that, you know, the match command can just, you know, match whatever. So we're going to use a built-in query command that's called like. And so you're going to type in like, and then in quotes, you're going to put 234, and then you're going to put the star. And that star is your wildcard. That says, you know, this string basically says the first 3 characters must be a 2, 3, and a 4. After that, I don't care how many there are. I don't care what they are. I mean, it could be anything it could be any number whatsoever. I don't really care, as long as those first 3 are 2, 3, 4. Once you've done that, go ahead and save your query, and you're going to save it as QRY234 area code, and then go ahead and run it. And when you run it, you'll notice here in your phone field, right here, everything is 234, which is what we want. Once you've done that, you can close that query. Step 2, we're going to make a copy of the query 234 area code query, and we're going to rename it, and then we're going to change a little bit with it. So we're going to do a copy and then paste, and it's going to be QRY not Duber, Richville, Waco. So just like this query says, we want to display all of those fields in which the city is not Duber, Richville, or Waco. So step A is we're going to remove the condition from the phone field. So remove that condition, just delete it. And then step B is add a new condition to find all the records in which the city field are not Duber, Richville, or Waco. So we're going to use a command that's called in. And then we're going to actually type the opposite of what that result is. So the function in basically says, give me a list, and I'm going to look in that list, and if this field, if the value in this field is in this list, then I'm going to return a 1. If it's not in that list, then I'm going to return a 0. And then obviously if it returns a 1, then I'm going to display it. So in our list, we're going to put Duber, Richfield, and Waco because those are the fields that we don't want to look at. You know, we don't want those records to appear. So to negate what's going to happen with that in is that it's going to say if it's Duber, Richfield, or Waco, it's going to give us a 1 and display it. Well, we don't want it to display it. We want it to do actually the opposite of that. We want to display the ones that are not in that list. So we're going to put not in front of the in, and that says basically take what value, you know, if it's a 1 or a 0 that comes from the in, and reverse it. So if it's a 1, it's going to change it to a 0 and not display it. And if it's a 0, it's going to change it to a 1 and display it. So in your condition or in your criteria field down here, you're going to say not, and then you're going to say in and open your parentheses. And then in double quotes, you put Duber, close your quotes, and then a comma. Then put Richville, close your quotes and a comma. Open your quotes again, and say Waco. Notice that your commas are not in the quotations, okay? If your comma was in those quotation marks, then it's going to search for that string Richville, comma, which obviously we don't have. So each city needs to be inside of its own set of quotes, and then a comma in between each of those items in the list. So once you've done that, you can save it. And we're going to run it. And then you want to best fit this address field. And you should notice that when you look at the city, those cities that we put in that list do not appear. Okay, step 3. Create a query to find all the records from the employee table in which the monthly salary value is $1,500, $1,850, or $1,875. So we're going to go to Create, Query Design, and this time we want the employee table. And then we want, in this order, we want employee ID, location ID, first, last, title, and monthly salary. Okay, and then we want to sort in descending order by the monthly salary. So we're going to come in here and we're going to say descending. And then finally we're going to put in our condition. So again, this is using a list. We only want to display those values that are $1,500, $1,850, or $1,875. So we're going to use the in command again. The difference with this is, one, we're not going to put the not because we do want to see those values that are contained in the list. And secondly, we're not going to put our conditions inside of quotes. And the reason why we're not going to put our conditions inside of quotes is because we are looking at numbers. We're not looking at text. The quotes signifies text, not numbers. So I'm going to say in, and I'll open my parentheses, and I'm going to say 1,500, comma, 1,850, comma, 1,875. Close your parentheses. We're going to save it as QRY entry level salaries, and then run it. And you'll see in descending order, Only those that are 1875, 1850, or 1500 shows. When you're done, you can close the query, and we're on step 4. Step 4 is create a query to display all records from the therapist table with the following options. Okay, so let's go back to query design. You should be getting used to this now. We're going to be opening up the therapist table. And we want location ID, specialty, and certification. Okay, we are going to sort the query in ascending order by location ID. So ascending. And then we're going to add a calculated field named therapist name as the first column in the query that concatenates the first field value, a space, and then the last field value. So in this fourth field, we're going to right click and we're going to say build. So we're going to pull up our builder. And we want the field name to be called therapist name. So if you remember when we did calculated fields in previous queries, when we started adding in functions here, you would get the EXPR1 and then a colon. And that EXPR1 and then the colon is the name. That's what the name of that field is. So that's what we want first. We want to say therapist name, all one word, and then put a colon. That's going to give us the name of the field. And then we want the first name. So the field is first. And if you want to look down in here, you go to your tables and you can look at your therapist table and you'll see first and last, which is what we want. So first, and then we're going to use our concatenation, which is your ampersand. So in order to combine two texts, you know, if we were concatenating or adding numbers, we would say the first field plus the second field, and then that would add those numbers together. But we are doing text now, and you can't do mathematical, you can't put a plus sign to be able to combine those fields. You have to use what's called a concatenation, and that is the ampersand symbol. It says, okay, take this string, and then concatenate it with this string because we're dealing with strings. So we need the first name and then concatenate that with a space and then concatenate that with the last name. So we have the ampersand, and then you're going to put a open quote, a space, and a close quote. Remember, anything that's inside of those double quotes is considered text. And so it's saying, give me the text of a space. Okay, anything outside of those quotes can be ignored. So any spaces that you put in between, like in here or in here, are just ignored by Access. It's really just for aesthetic purposes for you to be able to see what you're typing a little bit easier. But if it's contained inside of quotes, then it's going to be considered actual text. So we're going to do another ampersand and then say last. And then say OK. So that's our calculated field. Once you have the calculated field, we need to change the caption over here in the property sheet that says therapist, if I can spell it right, name with a space. So when we display our results, instead of seeing therapist name without a space, we want to be able to see therapist name with a space. And then once you've done that, the last thing that we need to do is we want to move this field to the very beginning of the query. So we want this column, this field, to be the first field that we see. So hover over the top, as I did, and highlight the whole field, click, and then drag it to the very front. Then we can save it, and we're saving it as QRY Therapist Specialties. Do make sure that you get your spelling correct, because if it's not correct, Sam is going to count it wrong. And then once you've done that, you can run it, and you can see that it has combined first name, space, last name into one field. And that's what we want. do best fit the therapist name column so that you can see the whole thing. Close your query, say yes, you want to save the layout, and we're done with that one. Step 5, create a parameter query to select the therapist table records for certification field value that the user specifies. So, query design, therapist table, and we want the location ID, first, last, specialty, and certification. Okay, so what a parameter query is it's going to turn around, it's going to ask the user, what do you want to search on? So if you think about it in Access or in our queries, you know, we could create a query for every certification that there is. And it would be a separate query for every certification. Yes, that will get the job done. But then you have to figure out which one you have to run based on the user input. So you need to be able to generate a method in which the user selects the correct query to run. Okay, well, that may be a little bit more complicated and time-consuming than what we want to do, not to mention, do we actually get every single certification? I mean, sometimes they come up with new certifications. You know, maybe the acronym changes or something like that, and then you have to go in and change your query. The easiest way to do this is to ask the user, what do you want to search on? So that's exactly what we're going to do, is we're going to ask the user. Okay, so since we are searching a specific certification, and we're searching for a string, we're going to use the like command. But we want to, again, get input from the user. So we're going to use what's called a parameter query, or a parameter option. So we're going to type in like, and then we're going to open a square bracket. And we're going to say enter the certification, and you're going to close the bracket. What happens is that when Access comes across brackets like that, it looks for a field, or it looks for a value, typically a field inside that query. So it's going to look for the field in the therapist table that says enter the certification. It's not going to find it because it doesn't exist. And so because it can't find it, then it's going to pop up a window that says, hey, okay, give me this value. I can't find what you're looking for, so give it to me. This is obviously something that you want to type in, you know, as a parameter, so type it in. Give it to me. And then it's going to take that value, and then we can manipulate it from there as text. So it's going to come up, and you actually need a colon there. It's going to come up and say, okay, give me what you want to search on, and we're going to type in a value, and it's going to come back as text. Well, we want to be able to say, okay, you know what? Maybe there could be an error in the typing of the certification, or, you know, maybe they add another character or something like that. So we're going to add that wildcard at the end of it again. And so we're going to use our concatenation strings, because we want to say, okay, yes, we want the certification, the first 3 digits of that, or the first 3 characters of that certification to be this. But what if it's, you know, got a couple extra characters on there? Maybe they put a space in there or something like that. So we want to say, okay, yes, match the first 3, but then I don't really care what comes on after that. So we're going to use our concatenation string, and we're going to open your double quotes and put a star, which is our wildcard that says match anything. And then we're done. Save it as query certification parameter, and then run it. And it's going to pop up and say enter the certification, which is exactly what we wanted it to do. When you do that, we're going to type in DPT and say OK. And you'll notice for certification, only those that have the DPT pop up. Once you're done with that, you can close the query, and we're on step 6. Okay, step 6 is create a find duplicates query based on the patient table with the following options. So we're going to go to create, but this time we are going to actually use the query wizard, because if you look in the query wizard, they have a find duplicates query wizard. Fantastic. We also have an unmatched query and a crosstab query, and we're going to be going through all of those in this module. So we're going to do a find duplicates query. Click OK. And we want to choose the table that we're looking for duplicates, which is the patient table, and say next. And we want to select the address field as the field that may have duplicate values, and click next. And then we want the patient ID, patient first, patient last, and their phone number to show up in this query. Say next. We are going to say QRY duplicate households as the name of the query, and say finish. And you'll see these two pop up. Their address is exactly the same, and that gives us our information. And that's all we want there. So if you can close out that query, and we're done with 6. Step 7. Find an unmatched query that finds all the records in the therapist table for which there is no matching record in the billing table. So basically what this query is telling us is we're saying, okay, the billing table is billing when a therapist has a client. Well, should there be an entry in the billing table if the therapist hasn't seen any clients yet? What if they're a new therapist? They're not going to have, if they haven't seen a client, they shouldn't have an entry in that billing table. And so we're saying, okay, come on, find that information because it's obviously wrong. You know, what's the purpose of having that if they don't actually have somebody to bill? So we're going to go to Query Wizard again, and we're going to say find unmatched query. And we are first going to look at the therapist table, which is, this is what we want in the, this is what we want to show in our query results, is the information from the therapist table. And say next. And then we're going to cross-reference it with the billing table and say next. And we want, well, first it says, okay, which field is common between these two tables? Because there is a relationship, it picks the therapist ID already. But if there wasn't, you would have to pick therapist ID in both tables, because that's saying, okay, this is the field I'm comparing in table 1 and table 2. So, and I have to be able to compare to say whether or not it's there. And say next. And then we want the therapist ID, location ID, first, last, and hire date. And say next. And then we're going to say, for the name, QRY, therapists, make sure you have that S at the end, without matching billing. And say finish. And you will see that we've got a bunch of people that seem to have, that they haven't had any clients yet. Once you're done, you can close that, and we're done with step 7. Step 8, create a query to display all the fields from the employee table. And we've got in the following order. Use the top values priority to select the top 5 records. Property rather. Save the query as query top 5 salaries. So we're going to go back to query design, and we want the employee table, and we want the employee ID, location ID, first, last, title, and monthly salary. So we want all the fields. We want it in descending order by monthly salary, because what we're doing is that we want to see the employees with the top 5 salaries, so the 5 people that make the most money. And in order to do that with this property is we want it to return the top 5 results. Well, if we don't sort the salary in descending order, then your salaries, your highest salaries are not going to be at the top, and it's going to return just any 5 salaries. So we want to make sure that our monthly salary is sorted properly so that we can display the top 5. Where you display the top 5 is through this property right here where it says return. That return says, okay, how many records do you want me to return? The default is all. We want to see all the records. But you have where you can put in numbers, you have percentages, or you can type in your own, say you don't want 5, maybe you want 10, or you want 6. You can put that number in there if you want to. But we're going to take just a default of 5. And then we're going to save this as QRY top 5 salaries. And then we're going to run it. And you'll see the top 5 salaries are displayed. Close that out when you're done with it. And we're on to step 9. Open the TBL location table in Design View and change the Manager ID field to be a lookup field value or lookup field with the following options. Okay, so we're going to open up the location table in Design View. And basically what we're saying is like, okay, when we enter in information, do you want to remember a name or do you want to have to remember an ID? You know, that's a random set of numbers and letters. Which is going to be easier to remember? A name is going to be easier, right? You're going to say, okay, the manager of this store is John Smith. You know, instead of, oh, the manager of this store is, oh gosh, I got to remember what their manager ID is in order to be able to enter it in there. We don't want to have to deal with that. So, yes, we've got manager ID in here, and that's the field value, and that's what we want stored in our table. But for the user, we want to say, hey, let's display all of our employees and let them pick the name instead of having to remember what their ID is. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go into manager ID, and it says short text. We're going to click the down arrow, and we're going to go to lookup wizard. And that's going to open up this little lookup wizard box. It says, I want to look up field to get the value from another table or query. That's exactly what we want. We want it to come from the employee table because our manager is an employee, right? So he's going to be in our employee table. So click next. We're going to look in the employee table and say next. And we want the last field and the employee ID. And say next. We're going to sort it in ascending order by last name. Click next. We want to hide the key column. We don't really want to show them what the key is. You know, we're going to store the key in this field, but we don't really care if it's we don't necessarily want the user to be able to see what the ID is. Then you're going to come down in here where it's got all the names listed, your sample, and you're going to resize this field to best fit. It's the same way as we do all of our fields. Just double click at the edge and it will best fit it. Click next. Accept the default label for the lookup column, which is manager ID, so keep it just as it is. And then we're going to say finish. And it says you must save it. Yes, we want to save it, so let's go ahead and do that. And then let's view it in datasheet view. And you can see we've got now, instead of an ID, we've got a name. And if we were to change it or even to look in it, and that's what step H is, it says change the manager ID field in the record with the location ID A to LB. So location ID A says Edwards, we want to change it to LB. So when you hit that down arrow, you're going to see all of the employees, and then you can select the one that you want. Once you're done, you can close this, and that's step 9. Step 10, open the billing table in Design View, and we're going to create field validations. So I'm going to open the billing table in Design View, and we want to create a field validation rule for the sessions field to only allow values greater than 0, which basically is saying, okay, this is a billing table. There shouldn't be an entry in here if the patient hasn't seen the therapist yet. So in order for there to be an entry, then they have to have had at least one session with the therapist. So we're going to click down here in Sessions, and we're going to come down here to our field properties. right down in here. And in here, you've got validation rule and validation text, and that's what we're looking at. That's what we want to do. So under your validation rule, you're going to say greater than 0. Number of sessions has to be more than 0. You have to have at least 1 session with a therapist in order to get billed. And then the validation text is patients must participate in at least 1 session. And a period. And that's your validation text. So basically you're saying, you're basically idiot-proofing your billing table. That says, you know, some person can't come in here and bill somebody for no sessions. And then you're going to give them a reason why it's not working. Because again, you're making it idiot-proof. If somebody's going to go in there and put in 0 sessions and you're not going to allow it, you need to tell them why. And then you can save it. And then close it. If you want to test it, you can. In fact, I will do that. So if you go to the datasheet view, and I'm going to just change one of these to 0. And it says patient must participate in at least 1 session. That's what we wanted it to do, right? So you say, okay, just hit escape and it will go back to the original value. And then close your table. That way you know your validation works. Number 11, open the patient table in design view. So we want the patient table in design view. And we're going to use an input mask wizard to add an input mask to the phone field. So this is basically saying if we look at datasheet view and you look at your phone number, all you see is numbers. We want it to actually display to the user as a readable number, and what we're used to seeing, which is your area code in parentheses, and then your first 3 digits, a dash, and your last 4 digits. And then it's more recognizable and easier to visualize and see as a phone number. So that's what we want to change. It's not going to, let me go back here, it's not going to change these values. It's still going to be stored in the database as those numbers. We're just going to display it to the user in a more readable format. So let's go down to our phone, and here is your input mask, and that's what we want to look at. So we're going to come actually all the way over here to this ellipses, and we're going to click on that, and that opens up our wizard. And we want to choose phone number, which is this right here on the top. We're going to say next. This is exactly what we want, so don't change it. And say next. And we're going to store the data in our database without the symbols in the mask. So we don't want to have to store the parentheses. It just takes up extra space. Store the number just as it is. No big deal, because the user's not going to see it that way anyway. And say next. And then say finish. And that's our input mask. And then we're going to save our table and switch to datasheet view. And you can see that the phone number now looks like a phone number. And then we're going to change the field value for the record with patient ID A10026, so this first record. And we're going to change the phone number to be 234-555-0001. And we're done. And go ahead and close out your table. Well, actually, we still need that table. So open the table back up in design view. And this time we're going to do field validation for your gender, because we have the condition that the gender is either female or male. Well, we want to make sure they only put an F or an M in there. Okay. We don't want them to type in, you know, the whole word female, although it's only 1 character, so they wouldn't be able to do it anyway. But again, we're idiot-proofing the field. So we're going to go to your validation rule again. And we're going to put in quotes F, and then close your quotes and say or and then open your quotes and say M. So F, and then in your validation text, you're going to say must be F or M. And then save it. Say yes to the integrity rules, and you can close your table. We're all done. And then now our final step, actually it tells you to switch to the data sheet view to test the validation. So you can just come in here and try to change that to some other letter, just like we did before, and make sure that your validation comes up properly. Okay, final step. Create a crosstab query based on the employee table with the following options. So we're going to go to create, and this is a query wizard, and here's a crosstab query. So we're going to do a crosstab query, and we're going to base it on the employee table. And we want to use the location ID for row headings. Click Next. Then we want to use the title field for the column headings. Sorry. We want to include, okay, what number do you want calculated for each column? So we want the monthly salary, and we want the sum. So we want the sum of the monthly salaries. And we want to, yes, we want to include row sums. So say next. And then we're going to save it as QRY monthly salary by title. And say finish. And then we're going to best fit all of our columns. And then we're done with that. So basically what this crosstab query says is that, okay, yes, we want to look in the employee table. We want to look at all of our employees. But instead of seeing what everybody makes and then make these calculations, we only want to see their titles. We want to say, okay, at location A, how much do we pay for our billing managers? We could have one manager, we could have 5 managers. I don't really care how many managers we have. I just want to know how much do we pay our managers, as a whole. And that is what this table or what this query is showing us. So if we have just staff, that their title is staff, so they're not, something special. How much do we pay our staff? I mean, that could be, it could be a reception. Well, we've got receptionist on here. It could be, the janitorial services, or, it could be the florist, or Lord only knows what it could be as far as the staff. It could be a student worker. But we want to know how much do we pay them, and then we want a total of the monthly salary. So not only do we want to see each title segment, how much we pay them, but we want to say, okay, how much do we pay in salaries to each location? And that's a sum of the whole thing. Once you're done with this, we are done with the assignment. You can close this query, compact and repair the database, close it out and submit it, and you're done. Have a great day.